They said no child could outthink the greatest minds of the age, but Timothy Caldwell did. Born in 1867, he was a boy who solved problems that baffled scholars, predicted events before they happened, and saw patterns in the world that no one else could even imagine. His mind worked like a force of nature, brilliant, unstoppable, and utterly incomprehensible. People came from far and wide to test him, to challenge him, and every time he shattered their expectations, leaving even the smartest men speechless. But behind the awe, behind the impossible feats, lay a secret no one could explain. A boy whose brilliance was matched only by the loneliness it brought. A mind so extraordinary it was as frightening as it was beautiful. What he could see, what he could do, defied reason itself, and the world would never be the same in the quiet, mist-covered town of 1867, where life moved at the rhythm of horse-drawn carriages and the crackling of hearth fires. A child was born who would leave a mark far deeper than anyone could imagine. The night Timothy Caldwell came into the world, a cold wind swept across the fields, rattling the shutters of the small farmhouse where his parents, Mary and Jonathan Caldwell, had long awaited his arrival. They had lived a modest life, tending to their farm and raising their children with simple values, yet even they sensed something extraordinary as they watched their newborn son. Timothy did not cry like other babies. Instead, he gazed at the flickering candlelight with an intensity that unsettled even the midwife, a woman who had seen more births than she cared to count. His tiny fingers curled around the blanket, as if he were already reaching for something far beyond the walls of the humble home, and those dark, piercing eyes seemed to hold secrets the world was not yet ready to understand. From the very first weeks of his life, Timothy's uniqueness became evident in ways that defied all conventional expectations. While other children of his age gurgled and fumbled at the simplest objects, Timothy observed. He would watch his mother kneading dough, his tiny head cocked as if memorizing the rhythm of her hands. He seemed to notice patterns invisible to anyone else, the way the sunlight shifted across the kitchen floor, the way the wind bent the stalks of wheat outside, the tiny, almost imperceptible habits of every person who entered their home. Neighbors whispered, at first in curiosity and later in hushed apprehension, about the strange child whose mind appeared far beyond his years. Some even claimed that when Timothy stared at them, he seemed to understand their deepest thoughts, their fears, and even their unspoken desires. It was not mere imagination. Those who spent time around him could not shake the unsettling sense that this boy saw the world in a way no one else could. As he grew older, Timothy's abilities became more pronounced and more impossible to ignore. By the age of 4, he was performing calculations that left even the adults in his family bewildered. He could count objects hidden from view, predict how many seeds would fall from the corn husks before anyone touched them, and recite complex sequences of numbers and letters he had overheard only once. The local school teacher, a stern man who prided himself on educating children according to rigid methods, came to see Timothy upon hearing the rumors. He sat across from the boy with a slate in hand, ready to test his mind, but what he witnessed was nothing short of miraculous. Timothy solved problems that would challenge men twice his age, and when questioned about his methods, he merely shrugged, as if the answers had always existed in the air around him, waiting to be plucked. The teacher left the Caldwell home in stunned silence, muttering under his breath that no one in the town, or perhaps the entire country, had ever seen anything like it. Despite the awe and admiration, Timothy's extraordinary mind brought with it a shadow of unease. People in the town began to watch him with suspicion, unsure whether his gifts were a blessing or a threat. Children avoided him, fearful of a boy who never played like they did, who seemed more interested in the secrets of the stars than in running through the fields with them. Adults, though fascinated, whispered of curses and unnatural influences. Some claimed that such brilliance was a sign of something beyond human comprehension, a force that should not exist in the natural world. Yet even in the face of fear and misunderstanding, Timothy remained unchanged. He spent his days exploring, questioning, and observing, moving through life with a quiet intensity that drew both admiration and apprehension. It was as if the world itself had paused around him, waiting to see what he would do next. His parents, though proud, felt the weight of isolation their son endured. Mary often sat by the window, watching Timothy wander the fields with a small notebook in hand, sketching diagrams and writing notes in a cipher she could not decipher. She worried for him, knowing that the world's inability to understand him could lead to heartbreak or danger. Jonathan, though practical and grounded, found himself equally helpless. No matter how much he tried to shield Timothy, no advice or protection could prepare him for the challenges that lay ahead for a mind so far ahead of its time. Yet despite the fear and uncertainty, they both marveled at the boy's boundless curiosity, his relentless pursuit of knowledge, and the undeniable spark that lit his eyes every time he encountered something new. In those moments, they glimpsed a future that was as bright as it was mysterious. As Timothy grew, the whispers about him spread far beyond the confines of the town. Scholars, inventors, and men of science from neighboring cities traveled to see the boy whose mind defied explanation. They brought books, instruments, and questions meant to challenge him, expecting him to falter or reveal the limits of his understanding. But Timothy answered each challenge with a calm certainty that left even the most seasoned observers bewildered. He could dissect problems in ways that revealed patterns no one else had noticed, offer solutions that were elegant in their simplicity, yet revolutionary in their implications. Some scholars admitted to themselves in moments of quiet reflection that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that could not be measured by charts, formulas, or conventional wisdom. Timothy Caldwell was not merely gifted, he was a phenomenon. Yet for all the fascination and awe he inspired, Timothy remained painfully human. He experienced doubt, curiosity, frustration, and wonder just like any other child. But the intensity of his intellect magnified these emotions, making even small setbacks feel monumental. When he failed to solve a puzzle or when adults dismissed his insights, he would retreat to the fields, sitting under the shade of an old oak tree, staring at the horizon with a mixture of frustration and longing. It was in these quiet, solitary moments that the depth of his character became apparent. Timothy was not defined solely by his brilliance, he was defined by his relentless drive to understand the world, to seek out truths hidden from everyone else, and to reconcile the extraordinary mind within him with the ordinary world around him. The town, though wary, could not help but watch in awe. As Timothy's abilities continued to unfold, he discovered patterns in nature that seemed almost magical, predicted the weather with uncanny accuracy, and began experimenting with basic machines and tools that hinted at inventions decades ahead of his time. Children, once frightened, began to approach him cautiously, drawn by the strange allure of his presence. Adults, torn between fear and admiration, found themselves reluctantly respecting his intellect, even as they whispered about what this could mean for the future. And all the while, Timothy moved through life with a quiet grace, unassuming yet undeniably extraordinary, leaving behind a trail of wonder, curiosity, and a lingering sense of mystery that no one could ever fully grasp. By the time Timothy reached his early teens, the legend of the boy whose science couldn't explain had taken root not only in his town but across the region. Stories of his feats circulated in hushed tones, how he solved complex problems in minutes, how he invented tools with precision and insight, how he seemed to know things that had not yet occurred. Some claimed he could read minds, though it was more likely his extraordinary perception of human behavior. People came to see him with a mix of hope and fear, eager to witness the impossible, unsure of whether to celebrate or fear this child whose mind seemed to operate on a plane beyond comprehension. And through it all, Timothy remained the same, curious, observant, endlessly questioning, and quietly extraordinary. He was, in every sense, a boy who defied explanation, a living mystery in a world that craved understanding. News. of Timothy Caldwell's extraordinary abilities spread like wildfire, carried not by newspapers alone, but by word of mouth, whispers, and the incredulous testimonies of those who had witnessed his mind at work. Scholars, professors, and men of science from distant cities heard of a boy who could solve problems that would stump even the brightest minds, and curiosity, mixed with a hint of disbelief, drove them to make the journey to the small town. The air was thick with anticipation the first time a group of learned men arrived at the Caldwell farm. They were dressed in fine coats and waistcoats, their polished boots reflecting the dusty road. Their expressions were a mixture of skepticism and expectation. They had traveled hundreds of miles believing in stories that seemed impossible, stories that defied logic, and now they were about to see the boy whom everyone claimed could outwit even the greatest minds of the time. Timothy, unaware of the magnitude of his visitors' reputations, greeted them with quiet composure. His parents watched nervously, aware that this was a moment that could shape the boy's entire life. The scholars wasted no time in presenting him with problems, complex mathematical equations, and abstract puzzles designed to test every facet of human intellect. One man, a professor of mathematics who prided himself on his analytical prowess, scribbled a series of numbers and asked Timothy to solve them in his head. The boy's brow furrowed slightly, his lips moving as if whispering secrets to himself, and then, with astonishing speed, he delivered the answer. The room fell into stunned silence. The professor, confident in his own genius, felt a chill run down his spine. How could a boy so young process such complexity with ease? How could a mind so untrained surpass decades of formal education? It wasn't only numbers that left the scholars speechless. Timothy possessed an uncanny understanding of patterns and systems, and he could predict outcomes that even the most logical minds could not. One scholar brought a small device, a rudimentary machine that was meant to illustrate principles of physics and mechanics. He challenged Timothy to improve upon it. The boy examined it carefully, turning the device over in his small hands, his eyes scanning every joint, gear, and spring. Minutes passed, and then he began sketching modifications on a piece of parchment. When he was finished, he demonstrated a version of the machine that performed with a precision and efficiency far beyond its original design. The scholars leaned forward, jaws dropping. They had expected brilliance, but not ingenuity that bordered on genius. It was as though Timothy had glimpsed an entirely new way of thinking, a perspective that eluded even those steeped in years of study. Some of the scholars, frustrated and flustered, tried to push the limits further. They presented riddles, philosophical questions, and paradoxes designed to confuse and test. But Timothy's mind navigated each with remarkable clarity. He dissected abstract ideas and provided insights that were profound yet simple, making connections the adults had never considered. His reasoning seemed effortless, fluid, and yet impossibly deep. The room was filled with an electric tension, a mix of admiration, bewilderment, and unease. These were men trained to reason, to question, to dominate their fields, yet here they were, rendered silent and awestruck by a boy who had barely seen a decade of life. It was both exhilarating and unsettling, a humbling confrontation with a mind that seemed to operate on a higher plane. Despite the overwhelming display of intellect, Timothy remained calm and unassuming. He did not boast or seek attention. His brilliance was quiet, almost natural. But his presence had an intensity that could not be ignored. Each scholar who came to challenge him left with a mixture of admiration and fear, unable to reconcile the simplicity of the boy's demeanor with the complexity of his mind. Some tried to rationalize his abilities, attributing them to prodigious memory or mimicry of patterns observed in books. Yet, deep down, even the most skeptical could not deny the impossible. Timothy Caldwell's mind functioned in a way that science itself could not categorize or explain. It was a puzzle with no solution, a riddle with no answer, and it fascinated them even as it terrified them. Word of the scholars' astonishment reached other towns and cities, and soon the Caldwell farm became a destination for anyone with curiosity or ambition. Timothy's life transformed almost overnight. Where once he had wandered the fields freely, now he was visited by thinkers, inventors, and experimenters who brought with them books, instruments, and ideas from distant lands. They wanted to see him, to test him, to understand him, and in their presence, Timothy thrived. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, processing and reinterpreting it in ways that astonished his mentors. He read voraciously, mastering languages, sciences, and philosophies with a speed that left adults gasping. Each new challenge only seemed to expand the limits of his mind, pushing him further, revealing capabilities that were at once awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. Yet for all the admiration, Timothy's extraordinary abilities came with a cost. The scholar's presence, while meant to educate and observe, often isolated him further from his peers. Children his own age found it impossible to relate to him. He was no longer just a boy who played in the fields or laughed at simple jokes. Timothy had been thrust into a world of intellectual giants where every interaction highlighted the chasm between his mind and that of ordinary children. Loneliness became a constant companion. Even as he solved problems that had baffled men for years, he longed for friendship and understanding. His parents watched with concern, torn between pride and worry, realizing that their son's gift, so extraordinary, so unmatched, might also make him painfully solitary. The emotional weight of this isolation was compounded by the expectations of the adults around him. Every scholar, every curious observer seemed to place an invisible burden on his shoulders. The burden of genius, the responsibility to explain, to demonstrate, to perform. Some days, Timothy would retreat to the old oak tree at the edge of the farm, where he would sit for hours, gazing at the clouds, the stars, and the horizon beyond. He would close his eyes and imagine a world where his mind could simply exist without scrutiny, where his ideas could flow freely without judgment. It was in these moments of quiet reflection that viewers could feel the depth of his humanity. For all his brilliance, Timothy was still a child, yearning for connection, longing for acceptance, and grappling with a world that could not keep pace with him. But even in isolation, Timothy's genius could not be contained. He began to experiment, building devices, testing theories, and exploring the natural world with an intensity that left his parents both amazed and terrified. Birds, plants, rivers, and the night sky became his companions, each offering lessons that no book or scholar could provide. He would sketch patterns in the dirt, calculate trajectories of falling objects, and observe minute interactions in nature that others overlooked entirely. Each discovery added to the legend, fueling the scholar's fascination and the townspeople's awe. Timothy's abilities were no longer just impressive, they were transformative, hinting at a mind capable of changing the world itself. As months turned into years, the boy who shocked the scholars continued to push boundaries. Letters arrived from distant universities, invitations to observe and collaborate flowed in, and yet Timothy remained tethered to the simplicity of his childhood home. The contrast was striking. A boy who conversed with the greatest minds, yet still marveled at the flight of a sparrow, the ripple of water, the warmth of the sun on a winter morning. It was this blend of extraordinary intellect and deep humanity that made his story so compelling. Viewers could not only witness his genius but feel it, understand it, and be drawn into the emotional complexity of a life lived between two worlds, one of awe-inspiring brilliance and one of tender, poignant solitude. And so, Timothy Caldwell's early adolescence unfolded as a delicate dance between admiration, expectation, and isolation. He had become a living paradox, a child whose mind defied explanation, whose abilities fascinated and unsettled even the most learned scholars, and whose humanity remained intact despite the extraordinary demands placed upon him. In the quiet moments between lessons and experiments, he would reflect, observe, and dream, leaving a trail of wonder and mystery in his wake. Every visitor who left the Caldwell farm carried with them stories of awe and disbelief, tales of a boy who challenged the limits of reason and understanding. And for Timothy, the journey had only just begun, the beginning of a life that would continue to puzzle, inspire, and captivate all who crossed his path. As Timothy Caldwell's reputation grew, so too did the distance between him and the world around him. To the scholars and visiting intellectuals, he was a phenomenon, a prodigy whose mind operated on a plane few could comprehend. To the townspeople, he was an enigma, a child whose brilliance inspired awe but also a subtle unease. Yet to Timothy himself, none of these accolades mattered. Despite the admiration and fascination that followed him wherever he went, the boy felt an emptiness that no amount of praise could fill. His mind was always active, racing ahead of everyone else, and the weight of knowing so much so early left him burdened in ways few could imagine. While other children played freely in the fields or laughed in the warmth of a sunlit afternoon, Timothy often sat alone under the sprawling branches of the old oak tree, his small hands clutching a notebook filled with ideas, calculations, and sketches that no one else could read or understand. The isolation of genius is not merely the absence of friends, it is a deeper, more profound separation, a chasm that grows when no one else shares the same perception of the world. 2. Timothy's intelligence allowed him to see patterns, connections, and possibilities invisible to ordinary minds. He could anticipate the behavior of people, predict the movement of animals, or calculate outcomes in moments of crisis with uncanny precision. Yet this gift, so extraordinary in theory, became a barrier in practice. Children his own age could not understand him, and even the adults who admired his brilliance often spoke to him as though he were not entirely human, an object of curiosity, a marvel, a puzzle to be solved. Timothy felt this divide acutely. He longed for companionship, for someone to see him not as a prodigy, but as a boy who laughed, who dreamed, who feared, and who hoped. In the evenings, when the scholars departed and the village settled into the quiet hum of ordinary life, Timothy's loneliness became almost tangible. He would wander through the fields, listening to the whispering wind and the rustle of the trees, hoping for solace in the natural world. Animals, simple in their instincts and honest in their behavior, became his silent companions. He would watch birds with fascination, observing the patterns of their flight, and track the movements of deer through the woods. These moments, while peaceful, were tinged with melancholy. For all his understanding of the world, Timothy could not bridge the gap between his mind and the hearts of those around him. The very brilliance that made him remarkable also set him apart, leaving him to navigate life in a way that was at once extraordinary and painfully lonely. The Caldwell family, deeply aware of their son's isolation, did what they could to protect and nurture him. Mary, his mother, would sit by his side for hours, listening as he spoke of ideas and theories far beyond her comprehension. She could not always understand his calculations, nor grasp the complexities of his observations, yet she tried to offer the one thing that mattered most: unconditional love. Jonathan, his father, was practical and steadfast, providing Timothy with guidance and grounding whenever the boy's mind became overwhelmed by abstraction. They both recognized that his brilliance was a gift, but they also knew it came at a cost. Every visitor, every scholar, every curious observer placed unspoken expectations on Timothy, and each encounter reinforced the isolation that had silently grown around him. His parents worried that the world's fascination might crush the boy's spirit rather than nurture it, yet they had no choice but to watch and hope he would endure. Even within the walls of his own home, Timothy often found himself misunderstood. Simple questions or casual conversations with his siblings revealed the divide between their worlds. His thoughts moved too quickly, his insights too complex, and his interests too abstract. While they played games or marveled at ordinary entertainments, Timothy's mind wandered to the stars, the behavior of rivers, and the hidden patterns in nature. This diver, Jens, only deepened his solitude. He began to retreat inward, building a world within his mind that was both refuge and prison. Here, he could explore freely, connect ideas, and dream without interruption, yet every venture into the world beyond reminded him of the limitations imposed by his uniqueness. At school, the divide was even more pronounced. Teachers, though respectful of his abilities, could not fully engage him. Lessons meant for ordinary children seemed trivial to Timothy, and the repetitive structure of education stifled his restless intellect. Other students oscillated between admiration and envy. Some tried to befriend him, drawn by curiosity, while others recoiled, intimidated by the boy who seemed to possess knowledge far beyond his years. Timothy, sensitive to the nuances of human emotion, often withdrew rather than risk misunderstanding or rejection. In this way, the isolation of genius became a self-reinforcing cycle. The more extraordinary he proved himself to be, the less he felt understood, and the more he retreated into solitude. The emotional weight of this isolation was profound. Timothy experienced moments of longing that were both deeply human and painfully amplified by his intelligence. He watched other children laugh, play, and form friendships with a yearning that cut deeply. He envied the simplicity of ordinary interactions, the comfort of shared understanding, the warmth of companionship that required no explanation or proof. He desired action, yet his uniqueness made it elusive. Even adults who cared for him, including his parents and the few mentors who truly appreciated his humanity, could not fully bridge the gap. This tension between extraordinary ability and ordinary desire defined his adolescence, shaping both his intellect and his character in ways that would influence every step of his life. Yet, paradoxically, this isolation also fueled his creativity. Free from the constraints of conformity, Timothy explored ideas and pursued knowledge in ways that others could not. He experimented with rudimentary machines, wrote notes in complex ciphers, and observed the natural world with meticulous attention. Each discovery, each small triumph, became a testament to the resilience of a mind unrestrained by social expectation. He found solace in books, in nature, and in the small, quiet moments of reflection that punctuated his days. Here, in this personal sanctuary, he could dream, invent, and imagine a world beyond the limitations imposed by others. These moments of solitude, while tinged with sadness, also became the crucible in which his genius was forged. Visitors who continued to come to the Caldwell farm often marveled at Timothy's brilliance, yet few grasped the emotional toll it exacted. They praised his intellect, chronicled his achievements, and speculated on his potential, but they could not see the loneliness that shadowed him. Timothy learned early that the world admired him for what he could do, not necessarily for who he was. This realization sharpened both his mind and his sensitivity. He became keenly aware of human behavior, understanding not just the mechanics of thought, but the complexities of emotion, the subtleties of envy, fear, and admiration. These insights, while illuminating, also reinforced the solitude he experienced. The boy who could comprehend the universe in ways no one else could also understood that he was, in many ways, alone. The isolation of genius is often romanticized, but Timothy's experience revealed its darker, more poignant aspects. Moments of despair, frustration, and longing punctuated his life, even as his intellect soared. He wrestled with questions of belonging, of purpose, and of identity, wondering if there could ever be a place where his abilities were understood and his heart accepted. And yet, through it all, he persisted. Every challenge, every lonely afternoon beneath the oak tree, every moment of misunderstanding became part of the tapestry of his character. Timothy's brilliance was inseparable from his humanity, and it was in the tension between the two that his story gained its emotional depth, its cinematic resonance, and its enduring appeal. By the time Timothy reached mid-adolescence, the world had come to recognize him as something extraordinary, but the boy himself remained grounded in his inner life. He continued to explore, to experiment, to dream, and to observe. He found fleeting companionship in the patterns of nature, in the rhythm of the seasons, and in the quiet logic of the universe that seemed to respond to his curiosity. Each discovery brought joy, each insight a fleeting sense of fulfillment, yet the longing for human connection remained, quietly persistent. It was a longing that would shape his choices, his inventions, and his interactions for years to come, defining a life lived on the precipice between isolation and connection, genius and humanity. Timothy Caldwell's story in this period of his life is a study in contrasts. He was celebrated yet lonely, brilliant yet misunderstood, admired yet isolated. The emotional resonance of his experience lies not only in the extraordinary feats of intellect he performed, but in the deeply human yearning for understanding and acceptance. His solitude, though painful, became a canvas upon which he painted the first strokes of a mind that would later astonish the world. Each quiet moment, each encounter with misunderstanding or fear, was a step in a journey that was as emotional as it was intellectual, a journey that would leave viewers captivated, moved, and eager to follow his story to its next chapter. And so, the boy who had once marveled at the dance of sunlight on the farm's fields continued to navigate a world that could not fully comprehend him. He walked a path between brilliance and isolation, curiosity and longing, forging a unique life that was both a gift and a challenge. In the shadows of solitude, Timothy discovered the depths of his mind, the resilience of his spirit, and the quiet power of genius tempered by humanity. For those who observed him, the lessons were profound. Brilliance may inspire awe, but it is the heart behind it, the longing, the struggle, the human experience, that makes a story unforgettable. Timothy Caldwell, alone yet unbowed, continued to grow, learn, and dream, carrying with him the weight of genius and the quiet sorrow of a boy whose mind had outpaced the world around him. As Timothy Caldwell grew older, the world continued to marvel at his abilities, yet he himself seemed both unfazed and quietly determined. His mind, honed by years of observation, curiosity, and relentless experimentation, operated in a rhythm all its own. Every day was a challenge and an adventure, a testing ground where the ordinary could become extraordinary under the scrutiny of his intelligence. While other boys of his age were content with simple pleasures, Timothy's thoughts were consumed by questions no one else dared to ask. How did the river know which way to bend? Why did the stars follow precise patterns across the night sky? Could a machine be built to accomplish a task that had always required human effort? These questions became the fuel for a series of feats that would leave even the most learned minds speechless, feats that seemed to defy the very logic of the world he inhabited. One of the earliest demonstrations of Timothy's seemingly impossible abilities occurred on an ordinary afternoon in the family barn. Scholars who had traveled great distances had come to observe him once again, bringing with them instruments, charts, and challenges meant to push the limits of his intellect. They presented him with a small, incomplete mechanical device, something akin to a rudimentary automaton. Rebuild it, they said, and make it work flawlessly. While they anticipated careful tinkering, Timothy approached the task differently. He studied the device, turning it over in his hands, examining its imperfections, its potential. Then, with a level of insight that left the observers gasping, he sketched a series of modifications and, within hours, produced a working mechanism that moved with fluid precision, far exceeding the original design. The scholars murmured in disbelief. Some said it was a fluke, a lucky guess. Others, more skeptical, tried to replicate his process only to fail repeatedly. Timothy, meanwhile, had already moved on, his mind racing to the next puzzle, the next question that demanded an answer. His feats were not confined to mechanics. Timothy's understanding of patterns, probability, and natural law seemed almost preternatural. He could predict rainfall by observing subtle changes in the air, calculate the trajectory of birds in flight, or determine the weight of objects by their motion alone. Scholars would test him with problems that had baffled men of science for decades, only to find that Timothy solved them effortlessly. His reason, elegant, precise, and startlingly original. He did not rely solely on memorized formulas or learned techniques. His mind synthesized information in ways that no instruction manual could teach. Patterns, connections, and solutions emerged naturally for him, as if the universe itself bent to the logic of his extraordinary intellect. Word of his feats traveled even further, reaching universities, laboratories, and scientific circles in distant cities. Letters arrived, invitations to observe, to test, to collaborate. Many were skeptical, suspecting exaggeration, yet those who visited left with tales that sounded almost mythical. A boy who could see problems before they existed, who could manipulate machines and materials with unparalleled insight, who approached challenges as if the answers were already within him, waiting to be drawn out. For Timothy, these feats were not for fame or recognition. They were the natural expression of his mind, the fulfillment of a curiosity that could not be contained. Yet, the reactions of those around him only magnified the isolation he felt, the distance between a mind so brilliant and a world unprepared to understand it. Among the most astonishing of Timothy's feats was his work with patterns of movement and energy. He studied water, observing the flow of rivers, the ripple of streams, and the rise and fall of tides in a way that seemed almost prophetic. He could predict how a river would behave after a storm, calculate the speed of its current, and anticipate the movement of debris with such accuracy that it stunned local farmers. They began to seek his guidance, relying on his calculations to prevent flooding and protect their crops. To them, he was a miracle worker, yet even their admiration did not alleviate the loneliness that accompanied his genius. Timothy was aware that his understanding was far greater than the villagers, and the knowledge that he alone could see these patterns weighed heavily on him. Timothy's exploration of mechanics and engineering grew bolder as well. He began constructing devices that seemed to defy the limits of contemporary science. Small automata that could perform simple tasks, pulleys and levers arranged with intricate precision, even rudimentary machines designed to measure and calculate on their own. Each creation was a testament to a mind working beyond the ordinary. Scholars who observed him often remarked that they were witnessing inventions that could belong to a future age, decades ahead of their time. Yet even as they marveled, Timothy's eyes often wandered beyond the workshop, to the stars above, to the patterns in the clouds, to the mysteries of the universe that no machine could capture. It was this duality, an extraordinary intellect anchored in boundless curiosity, that made him both incomprehensible and deeply fascinating. Despite the outward success of his feats, Timothy faced constant emotional challenges, the very brilliance that allowed him to accomplish too. The impossible made ordinary interactions fraught with difficulty. Children his age could not follow his explanations, while adults often failed to comprehend the depth of his thought. Visitors praised his work, yet he sensed the subtle fear in their admiration, a fear of the unknown, of a mind that operated beyond the rules of conventional understanding. These experiences reinforced the solitude that had shadowed him since childhood. Each triumph, while celebrated, reminded Timothy of the divide between his mind and the ordinary world. Yet rather than diminish his resolve, this isolation became a crucible in which his genius was forged even further, honing not just his intellect, but his resilience, patience, and self-reliance. Timothy's feats also extended into abstract thought, into areas of knowledge that seemed almost magical to those around him. He composed theories about the behavior of light, motion, and sound that confounded visiting scholars, yet were expressed with a clarity that left listeners both awestruck and uneasy. He drew connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena, revealing hidden laws of nature with a precision that had never been documented. Observers often commented that his mind worked in a dimension that they could glimpse but never fully enter, a realm where logic and intuition intertwined seamlessly, producing insights that were both elegant and profound. It was as if Timothy perceived the very framework of the universe and could manipulate it, with the ease of a conductor guiding an orchestra. In one particularly memorable incident, a group of professors presented Timothy with a series of mechanical puzzles, each more complex than the last, designed to stump him. The room was tense, filled with anticipation and doubt. Timothy examined each challenge in silence, his young hands deftly moving components, sketching solutions and testing theories. Within hours, each puzzle was solved, not merely in a functional sense, but in a way that optimized efficiency, elegance, and ingenuity. The professors watched, jaws agape, as the boy demonstrated solutions that even their most sophisticated education could not anticipate. Some speculated that he was capable of seeing multiple steps ahead in a process simultaneously, a cognitive ability beyond human norms. Timothy, however, seemed unaware of the astonishment he inspired. For him, solving these problems was simply a matter of observation, calculation, and imagination. Yet for all the outward brilliance, Timothy remained deeply human, experiencing doubt, frustration, and moments of self-reflection. Some projects failed, ideas did not work as intended, and occasionally the enormity of what he perceived overwhelmed him. These moments, while challenging, were also integral to his growth. They reinforced the delicate balance between genius and perseverance, teaching him resilience in the face of impossible odds. Observers rarely witnessed these private struggles, yet they were crucial to the emotional depth of his story. It was not only what he accomplished that made him remarkable, but how he navigated the obstacles, setbacks, and solitude that accompanied his extraordinary mind. Timothy's feats eventually drew attention far beyond his village. Scholars, inventors, and patrons from cities across the region sought him out, curious to witness the boy who defied explanation. Some offered opportunities for formal study, others for experimentation, yet Timothy's priorities were not dictated by fame or recognition. He pursued knowledge for its own sake, guided by an insatiable curiosity and a desire to understand the world at its most fundamental level. Each challenge he undertook was an opportunity to explore, to learn, and to test the limits of his own mind. And as he worked, his reputation grew into legend, a boy who achieved the impossible yet remained grounded in the quiet determination and wonder that defined him. The story of Timothy Caldwell's feats is not simply one of intellect, but of vision, creativity, and the relentless pursuit of understanding. His accomplishments spanned mechanics, mathematics, natural science, and beyond, each one leaving observers in awe and often fear. Yet underlying every extraordinary act was a young mind still discovering itself, grappling with the enormity of its own capabilities and yearning for a world that could appreciate both his brilliance and his humanity. In every device, every prediction, and every Timothy revealed not only the potential of genius, but the emotional depth, resilience, and imagination that made him truly unforgettable. By the time he reached late adolescence, Timothy's feats had become the stuff of legend. Scholars who had initially doubted him now spoke of him in reverent tones. Letters and reports circulated his achievements, and his name became synonymous with brilliance that defied explanation. Yet for Timothy, these accolades were secondary to the joy of discovery itself. Every success, every moment of understanding, was a step on a journey that had only begun, a journey that would continue to astonish, inspire, and captivate all who would come to know his story. As Timothy Caldwell moved into adulthood, the echoes of his extraordinary youth continued to resonate through every corner of the world he inhabited. Tales of his intellect, his inventions, and his uncanny understanding of nature had traveled far beyond the quiet village of his birth. Scholars who had once come to test him were now chronicling his feats, sending letters to colleagues, publishing papers that described the boy who defied explanation. Yet for Timothy, the accolades and admiration were secondary to the enduring questions that had driven him from the beginning. The mysteries of the universe, the subtle patterns of the natural world, and the uncharted territories of thought were still more compelling than fame. He pursued knowledge not for recognition, but because the pursuee itself was a form of life, a rhythm as necessary as breath or sleep. Even as he continued to astound observers, Timothy remained grounded in the quiet humanity that had always defined him. He sought connection in unexpected ways, often sharing his discoveries with those he trusted, mentoring younger minds who showed a spark of curiosity and guiding those who dared to think differently. Unlike the scholars who had initially approached him with skepticism and competitive zeal, Timothy treated intellect as a shared journey, not a tool of distinction. He found joy in revealing the beauty of patterns in nature, the logic behind machines, and the poetry hidden in mathematics. Yet even in these interactions, there was a subtle melancholy. Timothy knew that few could truly walk alongside him. that the depth of his perception was often beyond comprehension. This awareness, while isolating, lent him a quiet dignity, a sense of purpose that transcended mere admiration. Over time, Timothy's work began to influence the broader world in ways that were subtle but profound. His insights into mechanics inspired practical innovations that improved daily life for ordinary people. Farmers, who had once marveled at his predictions of weather and water flow, found their work transformed by his guidance. Inventors and engineers who engaged with him adopted principles he had demonstrated decades ahead of contemporary understanding. Even scholars, initially awed and unsettled, began to recognize that Timothy Caldwell was not merely a curiosity or anomaly, but a force capable of shaping the trajectory of human knowledge. Letters from distant cities spoke of him as a prodigy, a genius, a phenomenon that defied the confines of conventional science. And yet, for Timothy, these labels were secondary. His legacy was not in titles or accolades, but in the enduring impact of ideas that could ripple across generations. Despite the recognition he received, Timothy never lost sight of the mysteries that had first captivated him as a child. He remained drawn to the patterns of stars, the behavior of water, and the laws that govern the unseen forces of nature. Nights found him gazing at the heavens, sketching constellations, predicting planetary movements and pondering questions that seemed unanswerable. He understood that knowledge is not a finite prize to be claimed, but an endless horizon to explore. This humility, combined with his brilliance, became one of the defining aspects of his legacy, a reminder that genius is not merely measured in answers, but in the relentless pursuit of understanding, in the courage to confront the unknown, and in the willingness to remain curious throughout a lifetime. Timothy's interactions with scholars, inventors, and mentors also revealed another dimension of his legacy, the power of inspiration. Young minds, captivated by the stories of his feats, sought to emulate him, to push their own limits, and to think in ways that had previously seemed impossible. Even those who could not replicate his achievements were nonetheless transformed by the glimpse of what a single human mind could accomplish. Teachers cited him as an example, writers chronicled his life, and communities celebrated the possibilities unlocked by intelligence, guided by curiosity and humanity. His story became more than a personal journey. It became a catalyst for change, a narrative that encouraged exploration, risk-taking, and wonder in the minds of countless individuals who came after him. Yet with every step toward recognition, Timothy remained mindful of the fragility of human understanding. He had learned early that the world often feared what it could not comprehend. Scholars who initially approached him with admiration often wavered into envy or skepticism. Townspeople, once fascinated, sometimes reacted with suspicion or caution. Timothy's genius was a double-edged sword. It inspired awe, but it also alienated him from those who could not grasp the depth of his insight. He understood that to leave a meaningful legacy, he would need to navigate not only the realms of intellect, but also the complexities of human emotion, perception, and fear. This awareness shaped his actions, his mentorship, and the way he presented his discoveries to the world, always balancing revelation with accessibility, brilliance with empathy. As years passed, Timothy's personal story became intertwined with the broader narrative of human progress. Innovations inspired by his designs, discoveries informed by his observations, and methods refined through his logic began to enter practical use. Yet, even as the material impact of his genius spread, the deeper influence lay in the inspiration he provided. Scholars wrote papers citing his methods, teachers encouraged students to think like Timothy Caldwell, and families told tales of the boy who could see the world in ways that others could not. His legacy became a bridge between intellect and imagination, between knowledge and possibility, and it endured far beyond his immediate circle. People who never met him felt connected to his story, drawn by the tension between human limitation and the extraordinary potential of the mind. Timothy himself often reflected on the paradoxes that had defined his life. For all the accolades and recognition, he had not sought fame. For all the inventions and discoveries, he had never ceased to ask questions. For all the admiration, he remained acutely aware of the isolation his mind had necessitated. And yet, in embracing these paradoxes, Timothy forged a legacy that was as emotionally profound as it was intellectually remarkable. He had lived a life that bridged worlds, the ordinary and the extraordinary, the human and the superhuman, the observed and the observer. Each step he took, each challenge he faced, became a thread in a tapestry that would inspire generations to come. In his later years, Timothy began to document his insights not merely as technical notes but as reflections on the nature of understanding itself. Journals filled with diagrams, observations, and contemplations on life and the universe were compiled, intended not only for scholars, but for anyone who wished to glimpse the mind of a genius. These writings revealed the depth of his humanity, humor, frustration, wonder, and sorrow interwoven with brilliance and discovery. Through them, Timothy ensured that his story would endure not as myth, but as a testament to the enduring power of curiosity, perseverance, and imagination. Readers centuries later would open these journals and feel the presence of a boy whose mind had seen the world in ways they could scarcely imagine, and whose heart had remained profoundly human. The emotional resonance of Timothy Caldwell's life was magnified by the contrast between his extraordinary abilities and his deeply human experiences. He faced isolation, skepticism, and the burden of expectation, yet he never allowed these challenges to define him. Instead, he transformed them into motivation, using solitude as a canvas for creativity, fear as a lens for insight, and curiosity as a guiding principle. His story became a reminder that genius is no measured solely by achievement, but by resilience, compassion, and the courage to pursue truth, no matter how unconventional or difficult the path may be. In this way, Timothy's legacy transcended the temporal boundaries of his life, leaving an enduring impression on both the intellect and the heart. Even long after his passing, the legend of the boy whom science could not explain continued to captivate minds across the world. Scholars cited him as a pioneer, inventors credited him with inspiration, and storytellers wove his narrative into tales of human potential. Museums preserved his designs, libraries archived his journals, and communities celebrated the memory of a boy whose life demonstrated that the boundaries of possibility are limited only by imagination. Yet the most profound aspect of his legacy was not in these tangible artifacts, but in the emotional and intellectual impact of his journey, the way it inspired curiosity, perseverance, and wonder in all who encountered his story. Timothy Caldwell became a symbol, not only of brilliance beyond comprehension, but of the enduring human capacity to dream, create, and transcend limitation. Timothy's life also offered lessons in humility and perspective. He had achieved feats that many could never dream of, yet he never used his brilliance to dominate or belittle others. Instead, he sought to share knowledge, inspire learning, and ignite curiosity. He understood that understanding is never complete, that knowledge is always evolving, and that the pursuit of discovery is an endless journey. This mindset became central to his legacy, a blueprint not only for intellectual achievement, but for approaching life with integrity, empathy, and an unquenchable sense of wonder. Through his example, generations learned that genius is as much about character and curiosity as it is about extraordinary talent. In reflecting on Timothy Caldwell's journey, one cannot ignore the emotional weight that accompanied his accomplishments. He had navigated isolation, expectation, and skepticism, yet emerged as a figure of profound influence. His life demonstrates that true legacy is not measured by immediate recognition, wealth, or fame, but by the ripple effects of curiosity, creativity, and humanity. The boy who had confounded scholars, inspired inventors, and fascinated communities left a world subtly but indelibly altered. A world in which imagination and intellect could coexist in extraordinary harmony. Timothy Caldwell was not merely a child genius, he was a living testament to the power of human potential, and a reminder that some lives, no matter how extraordinary, are defined not only by what is achieved, but by the inspiration they leave behind. Even centuries later, the story of Timothy Caldwell continues to resonate because it speaks to the universal longing to understand, to create, and to connect. He remains a symbol of what is possible when brilliance is paired with humility, when curiosity is tempered by empathy, and when the human heart guides the mind as much as intellect shapes action. His legacy is at once emotional and intellectual, offering viewers and readers alike the thrill of discovery and the poignancy of human experience. Timothy Caldwell, the boy whom science could not explain, left behind a story that transcends time, inspiring awe, reflection, and a sense of wonder that continues to captivate all who encounter it.